Hey, welcome back to the South River Fly Shop After Hours podcast. I'm Tommy Lawhorn, co-owner of the shop here, and we'll be talking tonight about winter fly fishing and some things you can do to be more successful and why you should be doing them. Joining me tonight.
My name is Dylan. I'm one of the guides here at the shop. And yeah, we will be talking about winter fly fishing. Frankly, it's been kicking my butt this year, but I haven't had much of a chance to get out.
Yeah.
We've been busy in here, both with recording, with our fly tying classes, and honestly, we've had a pretty busy winter. We've had a fair few people in.
Yeah.
Not even just counting the holiday season. We've been pretty busy.
We've had
Not to
low
mention
water,
pre-season.
but decent weather up to now. Looks like
this week.
Looks like that's all about to change tomorrow evening. So it's a good time to talk about. We're going to see everything kind of shift completely into that winter mode with these cold temperatures and snow and ice. And there's a big difference between fishing, nicer weather and winter weather. So we'll just jump right in and get started.
I think we're going to go ahead and start with conditions. What are we looking at in this winter season? Where is the water at usually? I think we can kind of talk about maybe the last 5 years. I know we've had some high water winters. I think in the last 3 or 4 they've been fairly low water, not counting the hurricane. I think with water levels we can kind of talk about, let's talk about fishing them in a different range. So because we're at a low water level right now,
we'll talk about all of that.
Yeah, we're going to go over low water levels, your medium or your normal level, and high water if you do manage to find some high water in the winter. Right now, our waters are low.
Yeah.
Our tailwater is low, the south is
Freestones
low.
are low, mountain streams are low.
Everything's low, right?
So the first thing that kind of comes to mind is what is low, what is normal, what is high, and my recommendation on that is do your research. The USGS water data website, you can type that in a search bar. USGS water data Virginia, South River, Jackson River, Bull Pasture River. It will find you those gauges, and you can look at those gauges, and you can look at some historical information based on those gauges that will tell you the current flow, the average flow, the highs and lows over the years. That'll be right there on that page, right under the graph, showing you where you currently are at. And you can also play with the time frame. It does limit you on the number of days you can go back, but you can plug in some dates there and look back at what was last week, what was next week, what was last week, what was last month. Levels looking like, what's the graph look like. So that's the first thing is get an idea of the stream that you're fishing, where it's at when you're going to fish it. Is it low? Is it normal? Is it high? Because those are going to determine a lot about what you're going to be doing. If it's low, kind of like now, we'll start with that. Lower stream flows cool faster. Lower stream flows are going to make the fish more susceptible to high barometric pressure. So your opportunities can get skewed with lower water flows. That can be the toughest of the flows to fish. A lot of folks think, well, high flows are tougher to fish, but high flows actually can be a lot easier than low. But with low flows, we're going to be looking at what is the most abundant food, what are they most likely to be feeding on, and we're going to apply some attractor stuff as well. but it's going to be the more subtle stuff. You know, typically on a lot of our streams when we get to these colder low flows, the midges are probably the most active bug. And none of us love fishing size 18s to 24s, but that's what the fish are looking for. It's that big bowl of popcorn in the room, and you're gonna have a few kernels. So that's often a good choice. Dylan and I were talking about this earlier. That's probably not the best time to be fishing a double nymph rig.
Yeah.
It's probably a better time to be focusing on one fly, getting it to the right spot, not having that second fly maybe holding you up too high or getting you too deep. There are some opportunities for two fly situations. Maybe you are seeing some rising fish on an afternoon midge hatch, and there's some fish that are actually dimpling, and there's other fish that are feeding basically subsurface. You can put on a midge emerger, unweighted midge pattern, wet it, and then fish a little midge dry on top. But that's not going to happen every day. Some of our better spring-fed systems like the South or Mossy, you're more likely to see that, the Jackson tailwater. But a lot of these next category streams, if you want to call them that, you aren't going to see that as often.
I do feel like midges this time of year, if you don't have them in your box,
It's your go-to.
it's got to be your go-to, whether it's your dries or your nymphs, right?
Yeah.
Now, fishing midge patterns can be frustrating, like what you're talking about. They can be, I've been talking about the mercury midge, glass bead midges with people lately a lot. A lot of the time if I run into someone on the river and they're having a challenging day, but we can see fish and they're actively feeding, or they're, further up in the water column, if not, just sometimes it looks like they're almost just right below the surface, not dimpling exactly. And I've said to people, do you have a glass bead midge, something with a slower sink rate? And I think 90% of those people have told me no, or that they've never heard of that. And it could be your make or break fly for that day. It's really important in my mind to have something with a slower sink rate.
And if you don't have a glass bead midge, but you do have some unweighted midges,
Yeah, unweighted as well, a thread midge of some sort.
wet them.
Yeah.
Just soak them good.
Just something that's going to sink slower. It's going to be pretty important. Now, it's still good to have some weighted midges.
Yes.
That might not be the right option every day, but it's hard to pin down a fly that's the right option every day, right? You should have weighted midges. I like that tungsten zebra midge or a midge pattern in general with tungsten on it. Your dry fly midges, if I'm fishing dries this time of year, I'm probably throwing a double fly rig at this point. I will be throwing two midges. It's just easier for me to pick out my spot. It's easier for me to kind of create that cone of probability and say, okay, I know if something rises in this range, that's probably a fish near my fly, and I should probably set.
And that's the thing is, when those midge dries land on the water, you're very likely not going to have great visual contact with them, if any at all.
Yeah.
You have to read where they're going to be as they're in the drift, where they land, how the current is, and you sometimes have to take a blind leap of faith and set the hook when something rises near where you think your fly is. Light hook sets. Midges are tied on very thin wire, small hooks that are generally very sharp. You should always check your hook points and make sure, but it doesn't take a lot of energy from a 9 or 9 plus foot fly rod to set the hook with that little hook. So a little more of a controlled hook set, will keep you from breaking flies off, but it'll also keep you from literally ripping the fly through. That sting that you feel on a fish if you set the hook a little too hard with a small fly is actually the fly tearing through the skin, and just not grabbing because it was too fast. That's a big thing.
Yeah, I mean, and we can get into, setting the hook on
Yeah.
the type of trout, but I don't think we
Yeah.
should really go too deep into that. Midge rises are going to be fairly obvious, especially this time of year, because that's about the only thing they're going to be rising on. Midges and tailwaters, I mean, I was on the Jackson just the other day, and there's midges in the air. Now, I didn't catch a damn thing that day, which is fine. It's just one of those days, high barometric pressure, low water, nice and clear. Feels like there's not a fish in the river, but it's just one of those days. But there's plenty of food that's still...
And if you're seeing bugs in the air and you're not seeing, especially like 1, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and you're not seeing any fish rising, we're going to talk about weather down a little bit later on in this, but you may just not either be on a feeding window, or B, there may be some other reason why those fish aren't feeding. But generally speaking, if you're on a stable water temperature and there's midges in the air, midges hatching, some fish are gonna come up and feed on them. So if take the signs, read the signs. There are days when we're on the water and nothing works. That can happen in any season, but winter tends to grab us a little bit more on that because, hey, we're already cold, our fingers are frozen, it's hard to tie on another fly. There's so many things that are added to it when you throw in cold weather and your feet are cold and all of that. So another thing that we talk about a little bit with flies for that low water, clear conditions, is the subtle attractor patterns. Small eggs, annelids, small worm patterns. And I'm not talking about something like the squirmy worm you see out here on the table. I'm talking about maybe a size 12 or 14 wireworm, or something that's more true to annelid size. We're not trying to imitate an earthworm here. We're trying to imitate an aquatic worm that lives in all of these streams. And a very slow moving, teasing streamer.
Yep.
And that's where we lean to those smaller streamers like a bugger or a zonker pattern. I generally try to imitate the more natural, less flashy stuff in that situation. Because sometimes if you're fishing pressured water, that flashy fly is just a turnoff for the fish.
It can be a little too much.
Yeah, well, they've been flashed before and felt a hook from it. So if it's pressured water, I lean to more subtle, natural stuff. 8s, 10s. But it's a very slow, like a down and across presentation. Really thoroughly working water where you feel like the fish are holding, or you've seen them holding. But you're not ripping that streamer through 10 inches below the surface. You are feeding it down to them and teasing them with it. Can be effective. It's a big meal. It's kind of hard to pass up.
Yeah. I actually, as I was taking some notes for us to do this today, I was talking about, I guess, caloric intake.
Yes.
What do these fish think is worth it? A streamer can be worth it if it's presented correctly, if it's not too flashy, if it's not an overpressured fish. But beyond just those points, that is a large source of protein. I'm thinking more, think injured bait fish, something that they can easily chase down and grab. They're probably going to take that chance. Now, I'm not saying that food isn't abundant in this time of year. It still can be based on the food source. Like midges are pretty abundant right now, right? But a midge does not have nearly the amount of protein as an injured bait fish or what your streamer might be representing, right?
Take hundreds of midges to
Exactly.
equal 1 inch long minnow.
Exactly. So it may seem odd, more for maybe beginners who aren't super down the rabbit hole yet. We're talking caloric intake on fish. That's probably not something that a lot of people are thinking about. But it can be incredibly important.
And if you're fishing some deeper runs and, water you can't see the bottom in, there are those places on our streams, even in low water conditions. It doesn't have to be a streamer tease downstream. You could stretch out your tippet to 4 or 5 feet and put a Pat's rubber legs on,
Yeah.
and drift it through that big deep run. That's another high calorie, easy meal, a drifting stonefly knocked free. Now, make sure that there's some big bugs in the stream you're fishing that would be imitating. It doesn't have to be a stonefly. It could be, other bugs. But typically speaking, streams like the South don't have a lot of stoneflies. Mossy doesn't have stoneflies. But somewhere like Buffalo or, the Jackson Tailwater does have them, or the Bull Pasture. So look at, what are some big available food sources to fish maybe those big deep runs that you're just not confident with a midge in.
Yeah. And this time of year, people are seeing online or on social media that midges are the thing to be throwing. And like we said, you absolutely should have them. But I think it might also instill a little bit of fear in some people to not want to throw larger patterns, not want to throw streamers, and not want to provide that bigger food source. And that could be a killer for you, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, we're strictly talking kind of water levels at this point because we want to talk about water temperature and weather separately. So I think that kind of covers, the level specific stuff.
It covers low water
Level specific stuff, and so we could talk a little about normal flows. And just to give you guys a reference, so we would consider about 100 to 150 CFS a normal flow on the South River in the wintertime. And normally from September to June is the wetter period here in the Shenandoah Valley. Hasn't been the last couple of years, but it will come back around. When you're in those more normal flows, say you're 250 on the tailwater, 300, even up to maybe 400 or 500 on the tailwater would be a more average flow. When you're at those more average flow levels, it's not low water, it's not high water, it's kind of greenish maybe, or clear to green. But you can feel the current. You got to watch where you step. That's kind of the time I fish double nymph rigs more. I'm going to start out most likely with an attractor and an imitator. I'm going to have a rubber legs and an egg, or I'm going to have, a squirmy and a midge, or a little black stonefly, or a pheasant tail. And if it's more freshly stocked fish, I might even do something like a rainbow warrior, or something brighter and flashier. I want to find what they want first of all, but I want to give each drift have multiple presentations on it. So that's something that I really feel like is a good time for that double nymph rig. So in the same line, that normal flow, if you don't want a nymph fish and you want to target more aggressive fish, that would be a time where you're focusing maybe on that next level up of streamer. Again, depending on clarity, you might want something with a little more flash in it, something like a Creel X or a bigger bugger, more of a rabbit strip type fly. You want flies that move pretty well without you moving them a lot, because you're still talking about fish aren't going to be super aggressive to chase even in normal flows, and especially in colder water. So that's another good, it's a good time to try that slower presentation streamer. There's some days you just don't want to watch an indicator, or you just don't want to watch a sighter on a Euro rig. And so that's more of a aggressive. You'll feel the take, you may see the take. So your smaller mid-sized streamers there, and I would say in that category we're talking about maybe maxing out at about 2.5 inches, maybe 3. Something, I like natural stuff. I like stuff that's imitating sculpins or crayfish or abundant minnows. White is a good color in the winter. There's a lot of little baby fall fish that are still around that are kind of silvery white. They're not 4 or 5 inches yet. So those are good kind of normal flow things to try.
I've had a couple people come in and say the only fly they fish all year is a white woolly bugger.
If you kind of had to pick something, I mean, it's a pretty good choice. Mine would probably be an olive woolly booger.
Mine would also be an olive woolly bugger.
There's just so many of that tan olive colored bait fish in all of our streams. But flow wise, kind of the next category is high water. And when you're fishing high water, that big streamer can find fish for you. It doesn't always catch them, but that big streamer can find fish for you. And be careful with big streamers, because a lot of these big streamers, these 3 to 5 inch streamers, are going to have 2 hooks in them. That is not a legal fly on a single hook artificial only stream. So you'd have to break one of those hook points off with side cutters or something like that to make that fly legal. I'm typically going to recommend that you break off that rear hook point on an articulated fly. No matter how well they're built, they can still come apart, and I want the hook to be in the part that's attached to the line. But normally speaking, that high water aggressive fish is going to try to kill it and hit it in the middle to the head. So that front hook is most likely going to be the one that's catching the fish. Now, if you're swinging a fly, I like the trailing hook. I like that hook in the rear of the fly. But that's more of trout spay or that big swung streamer. So using the streamer as a fish catching tool, the big streamer is a fish catching tool in high water. But you're also, if you're set up to do it, you can identify where fish are with that streamer, even the ones that just maybe grab it, don't take, or you see them flash. And you can go back and fish those seams and edges if you can reach them with an nymph rig. Very effective. Moving that fish on a streamer, by the time you get back to it, change rigs, he's forgotten you're there. Run a nymph rig through there, you got a good shot at, where to get the nymph rig. With big water, it's sometimes hard to figure out, where does that cast need to be. I love fishing higher water. It pushes fish out of the main current. It pushes them into softer edges. Even nymph fishing, you can start identifying those places that fish are going to kind of, I won't say pile up, but maybe 5 or 6 fish that were spread out over a 20-foot area. Because of high water, they're now pushed into this little 6 by 3 seam. Because they're looking for the easiest place to sit and get enough calories and You know, they can't just sit anywhere when those higher flows are happening. There's too much current in some places. So that's a great thing about high water.
With high water and, with talking the vocabulary of it, right? Your seams, your shelves, your runs, your riffles, things of that nature, things that we use to describe where fish may be sitting. This kind of gets into reading water.
Yeah.
And reading water is a difficult topic to cover just over a podcast. That's something where you need to get out and learn it on your own time, or, of course, you could take a guide and we can go over that with you as well. I'm not going to get into it. We're not going to get into it. It's a big topic. It's like a whole nother episode. But it is very important when it comes to normal and high water and low water as well.
Yeah.
Reading water is detrimental, honestly. But I think you covered high water. We covered our water heights pretty well. I think we can talk about water temperatures and what they mean for these fish.
So water temperature is, in my opinion, more critical than water level. Trout are cold water species, but their metabolism, I would call them more of a cool water species, because their metabolism, when you start getting to water temperatures in that 40 or less degree range, really shuts down. And I've talked about this on the brook trout, that on a mountain stream when the water temperature is below 40 degrees, that little native brook trout might as well be a rock on the bottom. He's not moving if he can avoid it. Because they're basically, I won't call it a hibernation or anything like that, but their metabolism has slowed down to the point where they're not needing a whole lot of calories. They may take a big meal every once in a while that just makes itself readily available, but they're really not looking for food. And that's probably the key there, is they're not looking for food. Can you still catch fish in sub 40 degree water? Yes, you can. I'm a big fan of that bigger fly, that size 8 or 10 nymph, that egg pattern. And we've mentioned eggs a couple times now, and I want to tell you why. Eggs are a pure protein source. There's not a trout species, there's really not a fish species in the world that's not basically DNA imprinted to not eat eggs. It's other fish's eggs, their own kind's eggs. They're genetically imprinted that that's food. And especially rainbow trout.
And I mean, it goes a lot deeper than that as well. Not even that it's just food, but that, okay, if I eat this egg, my eggs might, that my DNA will be stronger in this river. That egg could be competition for food in the future. Now, I might be getting way too deep into that. It's hard to say, it's impossible to say if they're truly thinking that, but it could be that way.
There's just, like midges on low water, you should always have egg patterns in your trout box. And some people say, well, that's not a fly, or that's cheating.
Trash flies.
Trash fly, they're the lowest common denominator in some cases, but they're real. I mean, every fish in every river lays eggs at some point in time or another. Trout are often keyed on other trout's eggs, because that's typically what's spawning the time of year that we're talking about. Winter is usually your brookies and your browns in October, November, your rainbows, these hatchery rainbows that have populated some of our wild trout waters are on funky schedules for spawning, but somewhere between December and March, maybe April even, these rainbows are spawned. And so there are eggs in the system. Springtime, you've got suckers and you've got all kinds of other things spawning. So eggs are an important food source that is natural in the system. Um, so, keep in mind that is something that, I'm going to rely on in cold water because it's too hard a meal to pass up. Stonefly nymphs. If you're on a stream that has stoneflies, put a size 8 or 10 stonefly nymph on in those, especially in the normal flows or higher flows on those, cold water days. And by cold water, I'm not just talking about below 40. I'm going to say up to about 45. Um, Once you get past 45 degrees, in the wintertime, that's not going to be very many streams, unless it's been a really good warm spell. It's not going to be any streams that aren't spring fed or spring influenced. And we will talk more about streams later, but springs in a river or a creek or stream are warmer water in the wintertime. It's groundwater. It's staying at a more constant, near 50-degree temperature than the surface flow of water. So you're only going to see those 45 to 50 degree water temperatures in the middle of the winter if we're having an extreme warm spell where we're not having 20 degree nights and we're having 50, 60 degree days. But there are times when you will find that warmer water temperature, and when that happens, when you're in that 45 to 50 degree range, there's a lot of ways to be successful. Single nymph rigs, double nymph rigs, fishing streamers. The metabolism has kicked back up a notch, and they're going to need more calories. So they're going to be more actively pursuing food. They might move 10 inches to a foot to your drift that wasn't precisely on a nymph rig to eat that egg, or I've seen them move 2-3 feet to swipe a stonefly nymph. The water temperature, in that below 40, up to 45, and above 45 are kind of the temperature ranges that we're looking at in the winter. We're not going to see 60 plus degree water in the wintertime here in Virginia. You're not going to see it you might see 50, 51, 52 on the upper south or Mossy because of how many big springs there are. There's really not much surface flow outside of those springs, and so they're going to hold temperature better. I've seen winter days at Mossy where there was a fog over the stream the whole day because it was 20 degrees and the water was 50. It's pretty wild.
Those are cool days on Mossy when it's like that.
So there's some times where you will get that 50 degree water in the winter. But tactic wise, water temperature lower than 40 is going to be really tough. I don't care what fly you're using. It could be a midge, it could be an egg, it can be a big streamer, small streamer. They don't have a lot of calorie demand.
With that, let's do one of our viewer questions. I think the one that was submitted to you would go along with this point pretty well. Now, we're talking low water temperatures now, right? We're going to get a little bit away from low water temperatures and what it means to feed them, or what it means to fish them, and talk about if you are catching fish in these lower temperatures, what is the safe protocol to handling them? You can go ahead with that.
Yeah, and this is a question from our good friend Steve Nelson over across the mountain, who fishes over here a lot. And so water temperature isn't as big a factor in handling fish as air temperature. But it is a factor. Most of the time in the winter, we're going to be wearing gloves. We're going to have maybe fingerless gloves. We're trying to keep our hands warm. If you catch that fish that you really want a picture of, and I'm going to discourage taking pictures of every 12-inch fish you catch, unless it's just a net shot. A wet shot in the net, flip them out and go, that's fine. But I'm going to discourage that take a picture, hold a fish at every chance you get. But if the air temperature is below freezing and you lift that fish up, you're taking the risk of freezing water in its gills. It can happen very fast. It can happen in seconds. That could rupture blood vessels in the gills. That could lead to a bleed that kills that fish. Take your gloves off.
Yeah.
Yes, your hands are going to get cold, but if the fish is worth it, your hands get cold.
There are some products out there, gloves that are marketed for fishing, for fly fishing in colder weather, that say you can hold fish while you're wearing these gloves. I don't care how much marketing you see on that. Please don't do that.
The only glove I would consider handling a fish in would be a nitrile.
Yeah.
Something that is not going to stick to that fish and take the slime off.
Yeah.
But if you're going to do a lift him up and get a hero shot, wet your hands, take your gloves off, wet your hands, get the camera ready, up, back in the water. 3 to 10 seconds is what we're shooting for. I mean, we're not getting 5 or 6 shots in 3 or 4 angles. Net shots, in the water shots. Those are all good things to practice in the winter time. And another side of that question that Steve threw out there was not just handling the fish and taking the picture and all that stuff, was be prepared for your hands getting cold, maybe taking a spill. Don't drive all the way to some hour and a half away destination from home without a change of clothes in the truck.
Yeah.
Without a warm blanket to wrap around yourself if you get soaked. There's just that, be prepared. And let's be honest, there are days that we should just stay home. Tie flies, fix that cabinet hinge door that the wife's been talking to you about. Sub 20 degree weather, wind, all of those.
That over if you want.
So sub 20 degree weather, wind, things like that, where you're not doing yourself any favors, you're not doing the fish any favors. Water temperature below 30 degrees. Those are times when your time might be better spent. Doing something else. Restock the box.
Now's a good time for you to be tying as many flies as you can to get ready for spring, summer, and fall.
Yeah.
Believe me, I want to get out and fish just as bad as the next guy, but
I mean, we're looking at a week coming up, according to the forecast, where 30 degrees is going to be our high temperature.
We've got some in the teens, we've got some single digits, and I'm willing to go out and fish it. That doesn't mean I'm going to, because at some point you have to say, well, if I do catch fish, I do have to handle them. If I do have to take them out of the net, it might be a fish that isn't there for next season, or isn't there in the next couple hours.
No, it's the cabin crazies will get us all.
Yeah.
I've fished on a 0 degree day before.
So have I.
Now I was fishing mossy. Water temperature is still 48 degrees.
Yep.
But the air temperature was 0. We lasted about an hour, and 3 of us, and we all caught fish, including a couple of really nice. This was quite a few years ago when we were seeing more nice fish at Mossy, but a couple of 16 plus inch holdover grounds. So pick your spots. If you do decide to do that, go to a spring creek. I've seen water temperatures in Lyndhurst on the fly fishing only area here on the south, on 25, 30 degree days, water temperature's 48 degrees. Those spring flows can completely change the game, but don't plan on being out there all day. You're not going to make it. So when we're talking about winter fishing and talking about the weather, we're also talking about warming periods and you know amount of daylight. Um, the shortest day of the year, December 21st, I believe. We're gaining a few minutes every day after that, but there's as many hours of darkness as there are of light. And if you look at sunrise to sunset, you might only be talking about an 8 or 9 hour time period that the sun's actually going to touch water, if it's touching water due to shade or you know valley floor where there's more open access to the sky might be earlier. Up on a mountain stream, maybe 10, 11 o'clock before the sun ever touches a rock. So daylight hours and sun on the water, even in those cold temperatures, can have a warming effect. A lot of times I would rather get there at lunchtime and fish till dark than get there at daybreak and fish till lunchtime. That sun on the water, a couple degree, a degree or two, maybe on a good day, 3 or 4 degrees bump in water temperature just from the sun. It's a massive energy source. Can really turn the fish on. It may be cold water, but a warming trend, whether that be sunlight through the day or a week of warmer weather, a warming trend can create a little feeding window that really makes a difference. And I'm guilty. We're all guilty. Got to be the first one there. Got to be there at daybreak. It's kind of the fisherman's creed. Um, you know, and it's not necessarily the best thing on the colder streams. Now, again, we've been talking about some spring creeks and stuff like that too. That's less of an issue. But when we're talking about these streams that are getting into the low 40s or below 40, that 2 degrees at 2 o'clock in the afternoon that the sun has given you might be the make or break. And if you've already worn yourself out and froze yourself to death by being there at 8 that morning, you probably will be in the truck by the time that happens. So, have breakfast. You know, and now you are going to get home later. But kind of plan that in. It's definitely a better chance at being more productive, especially on a cold but sunny day. Those high barometric pressure days when you are getting a bluebird sky and plenty of sun. If they're going to turn on, it's probably going to be when that temperature bumps a couple degrees. It's probably not going to be at 8 o'clock in the morning.
Our early mornings right now, the high will say, 44, 46 on a warm day at the moment, but 8 a.m. is 12 degrees.
Yeah, it might be 25, might be 12.
Maybe.
And there hasn't been any input of heat from the sun at 8 a.m. It's just coming over the ridge.
Yeah.
We are right directly west of the Blue Ridge here on the south, and so at 8 a.m. the sun is just coming over the ridge.
Yeah.
So it's not making any impact at that point. It's going to take a few hours. Now on a nice, a 25 degree night and it's up to 45 or 50 degrees by 10 a.m., you might see that feeding window at 11 or noon. But I just had a trip the week before Christmas where we caught a few fish from 11 to 12:30, but it was, a very kind of slow, 3 or 4 fish. And then from about 1 o'clock to 2:30, we landed 6 and lost 5 or 6 more. They really turned on. There was a little bump. It was a nice sunny day. It was a warmer day, and it hadn't been too cold of a night, below 30 overnight. But, we got up to high 40s, and the sun was out. and we got a feeding window about 1:30, 2 o'clock in the afternoon that really turned on.
I think with weather, let's talk about those sunny bluebird skies. Those days with high barometric pressure, what do we need to be doing? What do they need to be doing?
That sunny bluebird sky, like I said, I'm especially on a cold day, I'm gonna wait till afternoon. I'm gonna try to get that 2 or 3 degree temperature bump out of that sun to overcome the effect of that high barometric pressure just making them feel a little on the queasy side. All your trout species and most of your freshwater species have a swim bladder. High barometric pressure is going to put more pressure on that fish.
Yep.
They're feeling that pressure. It's kind of like that uncle that everyone has that always hugs you a little too tight. You know, that's, it's just not comfortable for them. So I want to stack the odds in my favor on those high barometric pressure days. And if you've got sunny bluebird skies, you've got high barometric pressure. That's tougher conditions overall, but there are ways to make that work for you. Using that sun to your advantage, looking for that bump in water temperature, and that feeding window might be an hour. It might be 20 minutes. But you got to be there for it. And if you got there at 8 and you're already frozen at noon, you probably won't be there for it.
Yeah.
And the converse of that is low barometric pressure.
Yeah, you're, instead of sunny bluebird, you're overcast, your rain, your snow, your low barometric pressure.
Yeah, and that's going to generally make them feel a little more comfortable for multiple reasons. One, they don't have pressure on their insides. They don't have that uncle hugging them. They've got more likely to be out in the open. They're less likely to feel the need for hugging tight to cover.
Right.
They don't feel as exposed.
Yeah.
My personal favorite is during the snow or during the rain when it feels like you can touch the sky with your rod tip. The lower that ceiling, the more likely they are to be active. And typically speaking, when you're in a snow event or a rain event, this one that's coming this weekend's a little different, such a massive storm, but typically speaking, when you're in that rain snow event, it's a borderline here in the mountains of Virginia. It's somewhere between 30 and 40 degrees in the winter. If it's closer to 30, it's probably snow. If it's closer to 40, it's probably rain. I've seen snow at 38 degrees here, pouring down snow, just hammering us. So you're typically not as cold. So especially on spring-fed systems, the not Mossy or Upper South, but like South in Town or Hidden Valley on the Jackson, somewhere like that, where you're spring influenced. There's a lot of springs feeding into that, but there's also a lot of groundwater as well, surface water. That spring influence doesn't vary. So if it gets down to 20 at night, that spring influence helps a little. But if it only gets down to 30 at night, that spring influence helps a lot more.
Yeah.
So, look at your weather forecast for the days that you can fish and plan appropriately. Are they calling for a high pressure system sitting on us, bluebird skies? Plan your day a little later. They're calling for it to, start snowing before daybreak and, but only get a couple inches. If you can get there, go.
Yeah.
If you can safely get to where you're going and get home, that is a great time to be on the water. A lot of times you'll see hatches, you'll see blue-winged olives during a winter rain or a winter snow event. You'll see the midges still hatching. It's really a very, that low pressure dreary day. And the almost raining, almost snowing is pretty close to the same. You know, that's going to give you a lot of the same effects. But put your raincoat on and get out there, because it can be very good. It can bring fish out that aren't as likely to be feeding during the day, during
Yeah.
bright sunlight.
I mean, we've seen some cool ones. The stories that I remember
Yeah.
are of Mossy. I mean, that day where, like you were saying, it seems like you could touch the sky with the tip of your rod. I mean, those are, for me, the days where we see some giants come out.
You see some fish that you probably wouldn't have a shot at
Yeah.
other times. Yeah, they're more comfortable. They don't feel like they can be seen from above.
Yeah.
And a lot of our streams that we're fishing regularly are special regs. They get pressured. We have a lot more predators. We've talked about that before. Ospreys and eagles and herons and otters and minks. I mean, everything is way more prevalent nowadays. You know, those bigger fish, they know how to hide. They know what good cover is. And there's times when you get surprised by a fish where you fished a certain area for months, had no clue that you never had a hint that there was a big fish in that area, and then you come back on one of those dreary overcast days and you pop an 18-inch brown. You know, where did he come from? He's been there, but he's got a spot that is his hunker down. It gets too bright, too busy, he's hunkered down.
So, moving on from weather.
Yeah, I mean,
Moving on from weather, we've talked about it a little bit, probably more than a little bit. We're gonna do a little bit more.
quick
on it.
recap.
A quick recap on stream types. This goes for everywhere, of course, but we are talking specifically about Virginia.
Yeah, in this general area of Virginia.
This general area of Virginia. So our spring feds and our freestones and our spring fed freestones, right?
Yeah, so we generally don't talk a lot about stream names, but everything we talk about is generally things that are very well known. You know, we're not going to be spitting out names of little brook trout tributaries. But when you talk about stream types, you have to mention names to make it work. And let's start with the spring creeks. A true spring creek is enough springs feeding into a decent sized waterway to maintain that higher water temperature over a reasonable distance, a few miles. And typically they're not huge, they're 10, 15 foot wide. And there's just enough volume coming out of the ground, out of those springs, that it's overcoming the cold nights, the cold days, the wind chill, the ground temperature. It's overcoming that, and it will always overcome that. And there's only a couple of what I would call really good examples of spring creeks that are pretty well known. Mossy is probably the best known of the bunch. The upper South River, the fly fishing only area south of town, in Lyndhurst area, that is a spring creek. That water temperature is very much modulated by the spring influences coming out of the ground. It's 4 or 5 degrees warmer in the winter than down here in town. It's 4 or 5 degrees cooler in the summer down here than down here in town. Might be more. On a really hot day, it's probably 10 degrees cooler up there than it is down here in town. So Mossy's the same way. And the only other one that I would put in that category would be Spring Run out at in Bath County, out by Coursey Springs Hatchery. It's the spring that feeds Coursey Springs Hatchery. Those are what are, you know, well-known, good fisheries that are spring creeks. And they're going to be good even in the coldest weather, as much as you can stand. There's going to be that water temperature that's keeping the metabolism up, that's keeping the fish feeding. Just going to be more active feeders in that water. And all three of them are fairly well stocked throughout the winter, from fall through spring. There's going to be fish available. They all have their ups and downs on fish populations, whether it be, habitat availability or poaching or other situations. But those are true spring creeks, and they are going to be good options for you in the winter, no matter what the conditions are. But that next level down from that is the highly influenced freestone, but have a lot of springs feeding into them. And we're specifically talking about limestone for the most part on these springs. We're talking about deep cavern springs that are holding that 50-degree ground temperature, deep ground temperature. The south here in town is a great example. The Bull Pasture River in Highland County, the cow pasture that it joins downstream by Coursey Springs. Spring Run flows into the cow pasture. Those are both fairly well spring influenced rivers. It may not be every inch of it is spring influenced, but there's certainly stretches, up to, maybe even a quarter mile, half a mile long stretches where that water temperature, because of the springs, is 3 to 5 degrees warmer than it would be on a true freestone. The Jackson at Hidden Valley is another example. Springs are a little more spaced out on that one, but it is spring influenced, and that can be a big help for you on those cold winter days, especially the kind of the poor farm end of that is more spring influenced than Hidden Valley. And then there's your true freestones. Best example I could throw of that would be like Tye River in Nelson or the Maury at Goshen Pass. They're going to be colder more than likely than any of these other streams. One, elevation, they're higher elevation for bigger streams, but two, they just don't have a whole lot of deep groundwater coming into them. There's not limestone in those basins, in that geology. There's just not that limestone cavern spring effect to get those deep-rooted springs to help with that temperature. They can still be very good fisheries in the winter, and those are both stock trout fisheries. They're not special regs waters, but that's something I do. That we'll put a little plug in here. Don't limit yourself to just special regs fisheries. Don't be afraid of, especially some of these higher quality stock trout fisheries. I mean, the Jackson at Poor Farm and Hidden Valley. There's stocked water on both ends of a special regs area. It's all good. And that spreads people out over 8 miles instead of focusing them all into 3. The Tye is all stock trout water, but it's a fairly high quality, very good clean water. And there's native brook trout streams that flow into the Tye. There's cold water inputs. There are holdovers on some of these rivers from year to year. There's a chance at a big fish on the bull pasture, the Tye, that are stocked water. There's a chance of wild fish in some of these streams. So don't limit yourself to just the special regs waters. And the last category in stream types, which we have very little of here in Virginia, is tailwaters. Yep. We've got the Jackson below Lake Moomaw, above Covington, and we've got the Smith coming out of Philpott Reservoir down near Bassett and Martinsville. Both are fairly out there. They're not easy to get to from any of our population centers. They're a couple hours drive for most everybody, exception of the guys in Roanoke. They've got a little better shot at both of those. But if you're in Richmond or if you're in Tidewater, and it's a long drive to either one of those. And they are going to be temperature modulated by what's being released from the lake. Now, right now, the Jackson is 40-degree water's being released, and it's dropping. So talking about those tailwaters and what temperature is coming from the dam, that's also information like that USGS site that you'll be able to find that information. You type in Smith River or you type in Jackson River, find that below the dam gauge and look up the temperature on it. But 40-degree water on the Jackson tailwater, it's not getting warmer going downstream, folks. It's getting colder. On these cold nights, that is not a spring influenced system at all. On the Smith, I'm not aware of any springs on it either, any warmer inputs into that. So if they're releasing 40-degree water from the dam, it's probably 36 by the time you get to Martinsville. It's not going to get warmer unless we get a warm spell. So tailwaters can be good in the winter because of consistency. It's pretty consistent temperatures, but you always want to look at those temperature gauges before you make a big long drive to go fish those. I definitely look at the temperature and look at it over a week-long, 2-week-long period.
It's always good to plan your trip out a little bit, especially this time of year. If you're someone that can only get out once a month, I've met some people that can only get out once a year. If it happens to fall in winter and you want it to be a good day,
do some scouting, do some planning.
Plan it.
Look at your gauges. It's a big investment of your time. So try to make the most of it. So we have some questions that came in, some other questions that came in that we're going to touch on here real quick. I'll let Dylan kind of.
Yeah, so we got some good questions today. We actually posted our questionnaire on time. We didn't post it 10 minutes before we filmed, so we actually got some good stuff. We already went over one. I've got a few more that we can do. I'm trying to pick my most favorite. I think this one I really like. This is from a friend of mine. They're not a fly fisherman. They don't know anything about what I do or what we do here. This is just, they've been watching, and it's really been interesting for them. So their question was, are you more likely to catch certain fish in the winter versus other seasons?
So we're kind of trout focused this time of year, but and trout being a cool water, cold water species are on the deck more in the cooler months of the year, the colder months of the year. So what we're looking for most of the time in these cooler months is trout, but almost all of our game fish, they feed in the winter. They have to feed to some degree no matter what the water temperature is. Smallmouth bass on the major rivers, they will tend to, I won't say huddle up, they'll tend to migrate to specific areas of the river and stage there for the colder months and colder water temperatures, but they're still eating. Is it a fly friendly environment? Not really. They're typically in 10, 15 foot of water. Sometimes they're in less, but typically you're going to find them in deeper water that's harder to fly fish in. The same being said with lakes and the larger bodies of water that are largemouth or muskie. Muskie are pretty active in the winter, but largemouth aren't super active and they tend to go deeper. They're still eating. If you're a conventional angler with baitcaster or spinning gear, and you know where to find them, they're still eating. In December, I was fishing a little local lake. Water temperature's like 42 degrees, and caught a 5-pound, 6-ounce largemouth on conventional gear. It was 24, 25 degree morning and 42 degree water temperature. They're still eating. Sometimes it's the biggest ones that are eating. So it's not just trout, but it's more trout focused.
Yeah. I think that was a really good question, honestly. My next favorite, I would say.
Can't forget our fall fish too.
Oh yeah, can't forget fall fish.
Eastern fall fish eat all the time.
Always. So my next favorite here is from Buffalo Wild Walker on Instagram. Their question was favorite winter confidence patterns on the South. I have one really quick and solid answer: eggs.
Yeah, and that's again always in the box.
Always. It's a good one for winter. I mean, it's just hard to beat. I don't even know if I can really improve on that. Have midges in the box. It's kind of where we were talking about, or where we started. But it is a good question. I think my next one that I'm willing to do, it's the time of year for it, right? We're all either, well, I'd say if we're fly fishermen, we're probably sitting at home right now tying flies.
Yes.
I bet a lot of you are probably watching this or listening to this while you're doing exactly that. And this question is just, what are some of the coolest or cooler winter flies to be tying right now? What applies to the season? What are some interesting patterns? What might be fun to tie?
You know, I think we're both going to have very different answers to that
Absolutely.
question. You know, for me this time of year, I lean to tying my streamers. And having tied flies for 37 years now, and having way too many flies in my boxes, I can tie a few zebra midges to fill a niche or a few nymphs in 5 minutes apiece. I want some time to sit down and tie streamers, and this is just perfect for me. You know, I'm tying my articulated streamers. I'm tying this winter. I've kind of been on a kick of tying brushhead deceivers. But typically, I'll tie a lot of intruder style spay flies. I'll tie some zonker style or graboid leech style sculpin patterns. And we've put some of this stuff up on our YouTube channel. There's some a sculptruder I put up there as a video you can look at. It's a great streamer pattern anytime, but you know, there's small streamers that work pretty much anytime.
Yeah. I think my thing when it comes to winter tying, I tie flies for the shop, so if I'm not filling the bins here, you know, I'm tying a ton of eggs right now, right?
Yeah.
That's what people are wanting to buy. We all kind of have an understanding that's a good fly to be throwing at the moment. I'm using winter to tie patterns that I haven't tied. I'm using winter to sit down on a pattern or a fly and just work on my technique, really. Work on things I haven't tried on flies before.
Learn new patterns. And just test it. See how it floats, see how it looks, if it's wetted down, what it might do in the water. Play around with different nymph patterns, play around with different materials, different ways to use those materials and everything that I could possibly think of with it. Mess with my tools a bit. I mean, I will sit down with a pattern on my vise. It's not a difficult pattern, well, I'll say, but I'll sit there for an hour on it. Yeah.
And just work on it and tie it over and over again until I feel like it's where I want it to be. And if it's where I want it to be, I'll figure out how to do that faster. And a lot of the time I'm also using the winter to prep. I'm using it to prep for spring. I'm using it to prep for the warmer months when trout do get a little more active. And I'm not saying hot months, I mean just slightly warmer months where it's a little more easy for me to be out there. And I guess I'm just honing the skill. That's what I'm really focusing on.
I think one of the great things about winter is by the time we get home from work, it's dark.
Yeah.
There's no yard work. You know,
I don't need to cut my grass.
There may be some dishes in the sink or something like that that need to be taken care of, but other than, and I'm going to age myself here, other than watching the boob tube, there's not a whole lot going on. There's plenty of time to pick a new pattern. Like I said, whether it be something that is simple but you haven't tried before, like a Creolex or a squirming worm, something you know you're going to use. Take that time that winter gives us to get better at it. To not necessarily learn 20 new patterns, but maybe be more efficient at tying the 5 that you fish a lot and stocking up on them. And maybe you don't end up using them all. Maybe you still have some left over next winter, so you pick another pattern.
Yeah.
But that's what I would recommend there is just take the time to use the time to learn.
Yeah, use the time to learn. If you have patterns that you really like and you tie, like you're saying, 5 patterns that you really like, take your time to get good at them. Take your time to get efficient at tying them. And then experiment a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Change your colors, change your bead sizes, change your hook sizes and maybe your hook style. See what those differences can do for you. Change your colors on the fly, whether that's your dubbing, your wire, etc., right? Just mess with it. Maybe that would be the next big thing for you for this upcoming year, just by changing colors and weights. And if you are stocking your box and you do a lot of nymphing or dry flies, things like that, dry flies is more changing your colors up, but with your nymphs, I would be changing up your hook sizes and your bead sizes is incredibly important. That might help you have a much better year. If you only have one pattern and that's the pattern that works for you, but it's on, let's say, a 2.8 millimeter bead and you needed a 3.3 or a 3.8 all year, you never tie a single one, that's going to be one hell of a sucky year.
Yeah.
I would assume that most people aren't going to sit there and be like, man, I wish this was heavier and not change it.
And like to that point, if you have a pattern that you like, that that's your confidence fly no matter where you go, whether that be a waltz worm or a perdigon, definitely tie it in multiple sizes with multiple weights.
Variations.
Maybe even, like he said, color variations, but definitely get that to where you get to the stream and it's a lot less water than you thought it was going to be. You still have your fly in the right size and weight to fish that day. No matter if it's low or normal or high, if you really want to fish that fly, you've got a range of weights and hook sizes to fish it. Because most flies work in multiple sizes.
Yeah. And I think the same thing with that variation. Now's probably not a bad time to sit down before you tie, open up Trout Nut or something, research your bugs a little bit, look at the different colors, try to match it.
Yeah.
Maybe you want to get into tying those realistic flies, those flies that look exactly like that bug. Okay, take the time, learn to do it, change the colors, why not? But learn what you have in your area, try to match it, try to create some variation while matching it, and fish it when you get a chance.
Yeah. No, like I said, there's just too many patterns out there to throw specific things around, but that would be, my advice for tying in the winter is perfect it, work on your base skills, perfect the patterns that you tie to where you're tying them efficiently, and experiment with some new stuff.
Yeah. Well, I think that might close up our Q&A section. Is there anything else you want to talk about?
No, I think we've given it a pretty round coverage.
Yeah.
We'll try to get the word out on our topic for next week as soon as we can.
Yeah.
If again, feel free to send us ideas. We've gotten a few. We're kind of plugging those in. And if you like what we're doing, subscribe. It kind of gives us a little better idea of what where we want to keep going with this.
Yeah.
But thank you all for a lot of views over the last couple of episodes. We want to give you good information and, try to be a good resource, for you to keep getting better in this journey.
Yeah. So thank you everybody for watching. You can find our shop here in Waynesboro at 323 West Main Street. Please come in, stop by, have a chat with us. We're happy to help you out with anything that you need, honestly. And thank you for watching, and we are looking forward to doing the next one, and we hope you like this episode, and we hope you like the next one as well. So thank you.
Thanks.